And then David brings everything to its final beautiful destination with these words, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And suddenly we realize that this psalm was never just about surviving life's valleys or finding peace in difficult moments, but about where this journey has been leading all along. The shepherd who guided, protected, and provided is not only walking with us through life, but leading us home into a place of eternal belonging. This is not a temporary refuge or a passing comfort, but a permanent dwelling, a place where we are no longer visitors or strangers, but fully welcomed into the presence of God forever. It echoes the promise Jesus gives in John 14:2-3, when he says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you," revealing that the end of our journey is not uncertainty, but a prepared place, a home where we are known and loved completely. What began with my shepherd now ends with his house, and that connection is everything, because if he is truly your shepherd today, then your future is already secure. The path may lead through valleys, and the journey may not always be easy, but it is leading somewhere certain, somewhere eternal, where you will finally be at rest in his presence forever. You've probably heard these words 100 times, maybe at a funeral, maybe in a quiet moment when your heart needed comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." They roll off the tongue so easily, so familiar, that we rarely stop to feel the weight of them, rarely pause long enough to let them settle deep into our soul. But what if I told you that hidden inside this well-known psalm is a truth so personal, so intimate, that most people read right past it without ever truly seeing it? The danger of familiarity is that it can make something sacred feel ordinary, and Psalm 23 has become so well known that we sometimes miss the heartbeat behind it, the living relationship it reveals. This isn't just poetry, and it's not just comfort for hard times. It's an invitation into something deeper than many of us have experienced. So instead of rushing through it like we've done before, let's slow down together, take a step closer, and read it not as something we've heard, but as something God wants us to truly understand. When David begins this psalm, he doesn't say the Lord is a shepherd, or even the shepherd, but he says something far more intimate, far more revealing. "The Lord is my shepherd," and that one small word changes everything, because it moves this from a general truth into a deeply personal relationship. David isn't speaking as a distant observer, describing God from afar. He's speaking as someone who belongs, as someone who knows what it means to be led, protected, and cared for by the living God in a real and daily way. This is the heart of faith, not just believing that God exists or agreeing with truths about him, but stepping into a relationship where he becomes yours and you become his. Just as Jesus said in John 10:14, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me," painting a picture of closeness, recognition, and deep connection. A shepherd doesn't manage sheep from a distance. He knows them, calls them, walks with them, and takes responsibility for their well-being. And this is where the question gently meets us. Have we made God personal, or have we kept him at a distance, knowing about him without truly knowing him? Because once you can say with confidence and surrender, "The Lord is my shepherd," everything else in this psalm begins to come alive in a completely new way. Once David declares that the Lord is his shepherd, he immediately follows with a bold and almost surprising statement, "I shall not want," and at first glance, it can sound like a promise of a life where nothing is missing, where every desire is fulfilled. But that's not what David is saying at all. This is not a declaration of endless comfort or material abundance, but a quiet, confident expression of trust that everything truly needed will be provided by the one who leads. A sheep does not determine its own needs. It depends entirely on the shepherd to know where the green grass is, where the safe water flows, and when it is time to move or rest. And in the same way, David is saying that his life is not driven by anxiety over what he lacks, but by confidence in who is guiding him. This echoes what we see in Philippians 4:19, where it says that God will supply all our needs according to his riches in glory. not necessarily all our wants, but everything essential for life and godliness. There is a deep peace hidden in this line, because it frees us from the constant striving and comparing that so often fills our hearts, replacing it with a steady trust that says, even when I don't understand, even when I feel uncertain, I am not lacking anything that God knows I truly need. And then David says something that feels almost unexpected, almost uncomfortable if we're honest, because he writes, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." And that word "makes" carries a weight we don't usually stop to consider. Sheep, by nature, will not lie down unless they feel completely safe, free from fear, free from hunger, and free from tension, which means that for a shepherd to bring a sheep to rest, he must first deal with everything that is disturbing it. In the same way, there are moments in our lives when God doesn't just gently lead us into rest, but actually slows us down in ways we didn't choose, through seasons that feel like interruptions, pauses, or even setbacks. Yet they are often His mercy in disguise. We live in a world that constantly pushes us to move faster, achieve more, and carry more than we were meant to bear. And yet here is God, our shepherd, saying that rest is not optional, but essential for our survival and our spiritual health. Jesus echoes this same invitation in Matthew 11:28, when he says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," reminding us that true rest is not found in escaping life, but in coming close to Him. And sometimes, the very moments we resist the most, the ones where we are forced to stop, are actually the places where God is restoring our soul in ways we could never accomplish on our own. As the psalm continues, a quiet rhythm begins to emerge in David's words, because he repeats this phrase again and again. He leads me, first beside still waters, and then in paths of righteousness. And this repetition is not accidental, it is intentional, reminding us that our lives are not meant to be driven by confusion or guesswork, but by the steady, intentional guidance of a shepherd who sees what we cannot see. A true shepherd does not drive his sheep from behind with force or fear, but walks ahead of them, calling them forward, setting the pace, and choosing the path. And this is exactly how God leads us, not pushing us blindly into the unknown, but inviting us to follow Him step by step. Even the detail of still waters carries meaning, because sheep are easily frightened by rushing streams, so the shepherd carefully leads them to calm, quiet places where they can safely drink, showing us that God is mindful not only of our needs, but also of our fears. When David speaks of paths of righteousness, he is not only talking about moral correctness, but about right paths, safe paths, paths that are aligned with God's wisdom and design, echoing Proverbs 3:5-6, where we are told to trust in the Lord, and He will direct our paths. And yet following requires trust, because we rarely see the full picture, and sometimes the road ahead feels uncertain. But when the shepherd is leading, uncertainty does not mean we are lost. It simply means we are being led somewhere we have not yet been. And then, without warning, the tone of the psalm shifts. And this is where something profound happens, that many people read right past, because David writes, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," and suddenly the peaceful imagery gives way to something darker, something uncertain, something that feels far more like real life. But what matters even more than the valley itself is the subtle change in how David speaks, because up until this moment, he has been talking about God, saying He leads me, and He restores my soul. Yet here in the valley, his language becomes deeply personal and direct. "You are with me." This is the hidden insight that so many overlook, that in seasons of comfort we often speak about God, but in seasons of pain we begin to speak to Him, and what was once knowledge becomes intimacy. The valley is not a place where God disappears. It is often the place where His presence becomes most real, most personal, and most undeniable, because when everything else is stripped away, we are left face to face with the shepherd who never left. Notice also that David says he walks through the valley, not into it permanently, and not stuck within it, but moving through it with purpose, because the shepherd is still leading even here. And in that dark place where fear would normally take over, something changes, because the presence of God transforms the valley from a place of terror into a place of closeness, where faith is no longer theoretical, but deeply, personally real. And it is right there in the valley, not after it, not once the danger has passed, that David makes this remarkable declaration, "I will fear no evil." And this is what makes his confidence so powerful, because nothing around him has necessarily changed. The valley is still dark, the threats are still real, yet his fear begins to lose its grip. The reason is not that the situation has improved, but that the presence of God has become more real than the danger itself. David continues, "For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And these are not just poetic symbols, but tools a shepherd actually uses. The rod for defending against predators, and the staff for guiding and rescuing sheep when they wander too close to danger. In other words, God is not only near, but actively protecting and directing, strong enough to fight off what threatens us, and gentle enough to guide us when we lose our way. There is a deep comfort in knowing that we are not left to face life alone, that even in our most vulnerable moments, the shepherd stands watch, attentive and present, and this shifts our focus from what could happen to who is with us. Fear may still whisper, but it no longer has the final word, because the presence of God speaks louder, steadier, and stronger than anything that stands against us. And then, just when we expect the imagery to stay in the valley, the scene shifts again in a way that feels almost unexpected, because David says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And suddenly we are no longer in a field with sheep, but seated at a table, face to face with a God who is not just our shepherd, but our host. What makes this moment so powerful is not just the provision, but the setting, because the enemies have not disappeared, the threats have not been removed, and yet right there in the middle of it all, God prepares a place of peace. This is not the kind of peace the world offers, which depends on circumstances changing or problems disappearing, but a deeper, unshakable peace that comes from being cared for by God, even when everything around us feels unstable. David continues, "You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows," describing not just survival, but blessing, restoration, and honor, as oil was used to soothe wounds and signify favor, while an overflowing cup speaks of abundance that cannot be contained. The picture is breathtaking when you really stop to see it, because it shows a God who does not wait for the battle to end before he blesses you, but meets you in the middle of it, setting a table where fear once stood, and reminding you that even here, even now, you are seen, provided for, and deeply loved. As the psalm begins to draw toward its conclusion, David makes one final, deeply reassuring declaration. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." And there is a quiet confidence in that word "surely," as if he is no longer questioning or hoping, but fully convinced of what lies behind him and ahead of him. What's remarkable is that goodness and mercy are not described as distant promises waiting somewhere in the future, but as active companions that are already moving with him every single day. In fact, the language here carries the sense of pursuit, as if God's goodness and his mercy are not passively trailing behind, but intentionally following, even chasing after him with purpose and love. This changes the way we see our lives, because instead of imagining ourselves alone or one step away from failure, we begin to realize that even in our wandering, even in our weakness, we are being pursued by grace that refuses to give up on us. This echoes the heart of Lamentations 3:22-23, where we are reminded that his mercies are new every morning, not because we deserve them, but because his love is steadfast and unchanging. And when you truly see this, it shifts something inside you, because you are no longer living in fear of falling behind, but in the assurance that God's goodness is always right there, following closely, ready to meet you again and again.